Spirits podcast, a boozy dive into mythology, legends, and folklore. Every week, we pour a drink and learn about a new story from around the world. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Julia.
And we are so excited to be joined today by two of the curators of tarot with an exclamation point at the Morgan Library, which we were happy and lucky enough to see. Welcome to the show, Dr. Claire Gilman and Dr. Josh O'Driscoll.
Thank you for having me.
Very exciting to be here.
We are so pleased to have you. And I can speak, I think, for, I would say, 99.5% of our listeners that tarot is definitely something that our audience is very much interested in. So when we saw that the Morgan Library was doing this exhibition, I was really, really stoked to get a chance to talk to you all about the history of tarot, both the origins of it, but also the modern usage of tarot. So thank you so much for joining us today.
And I know there's a bit of a story as to how this kind of like two-part exhibit came together. Josh, my understanding is that you kind of led the charge on sort of the origins of it, talking about tarot as, you know, a historical phenomenon, historical objects. And Claire, you kind of brought some of that modern curation. How did this come together? And how did you both find your way to be like giving remarks at a press preview and welcoming people into this exhibit?
Well, that actually goes back to my colleague, Frank Trujillo, the co-curator of the Renaissance symbols portion of the exhibition. He's a book conservator at the Morgan, actually the head of our conservation department. For years, he's been part of an international team of conservators and conservation scientists who have been studying the technical aspects of the Renaissance tarot cards. And I should preface this by saying, at the Morgan, we have 35 of the Visconti Sforza tarot cards, one of the earliest and most complete of the Renaissance tarot decks, and they're in my department. And that's why Frank was particularly interested in these objects. And that team has generated a mountain of data that created a momentum around the cards. And so Frank and I began talking about potential exhibition plans, initially focused just on the Renaissance tarot deck, which belongs to the Morgan. At the same time we were making those plans, Claire was interviewing for the position that she now has of the Modern and Contemporary Drawings head. And she proposed, not knowing our plans, she proposed an exhibition on contemporary artists' engagement with tarot. And it was just too good of a coincidence to be true. So when we were very excited that Claire got the job, and then we immediately started working on this collaborative two-part exhibition that has the Renaissance gallery, but also the Modern Contemporary gallery.
That's what we call kismet, baby.
That's right. Yeah.
Claire, was that a coincidence or was that like the deepest pre-interview job research of all time?
No, it was absolute utter coincidence. I mean, it was actually amazing. I had been observing how many modern and contemporary artists were working with tarot when I was at the Drawing Center. So I knew that the Morgan had that deck, but I had no idea that they were planning to do anything with the deck. So, you know, when I came in to do the interview, it was kind of one of my exhibition ideas that I put up on the screen. And I, you know, had the Morgan deck alongside some other possible, you know, images. And I said, well, you know, we should really do something with tarot because we have this deck. And then they said, well, in fact, we are doing this exhibition about tarot in the Renaissance. So we'll make it a 2-gallery show, which of course was very exciting. But the sort of challenging aspect of that was that the exhibition was already on the calendar. I think Josh and Frank had already been prepping their checklist, and I had to sort of supercharge my side of the exhibition to get it ready for that date, which was sort of like maybe a little over a year and a half, I guess. Maybe a little closer to 2 years, but not a full 2 years, and really having absolutely no idea what I was going to put in that section. I mean, I really had just done the most basic of research at that point. And I worked with my colleague, Esther Levy, who's a curatorial assistant in my department. And so sort of the two of us just went straight to work and to try and figure out what we're going to do with our part of the show.
Really kind of threw you into the deep end there, immediately got the job, and they were like, all right, and you have less than the usual timeline to start planning an exhibition. Let's go.
Yes. Yeah. But it was a lot of fun. I mean, such a fun exhibition to dive into.
Well, it sounds like that Visconti Sforza deck is kind of like the nexus around which a lot of this began revolving. Josh, can you tell us a little bit about why this deck is so important? You mentioned that it's one of the most complete decks to survive from the 15th century. I think a lot of us here who are typically, I think, modern tarot practitioners know it's kind of Renaissance-y, that there's like an Italy, portion to it, know that this was kind of old in some way. Egypt ? We'll get into that in Claire's portion. But Josh, why is this deck important and how was it used originally?
So tarot began as a card game. That we have a pretty good sense of its origins, when and where it developed, which is in northern Italy in the middle of the 15th century. And there are about, I would say, 15 or so Renaissance decks that survive from the 15th century in various states of completion. Some of them are just one or two cards. The Visconti Sforza deck, which is shared between the Morgan in New York and the Accademia Carrara in Bergamo, and also a private collection in Bergamo, preserves 74 of the 78 cards in a tarot deck. So it is by far the most complete of the hand-painted Renaissance tarot decks, which is one of the reasons why it's so important. But another reason why is because it also happens to be one of the most copied decks from the Renaissance. And we don't really know why. When you see later copies of the Renaissance cards, they're almost always copying the Visconti Sforza deck. There must have been some accessibility for artists to see this deck throughout the centuries. It was, we don't really know the circumstances, but its visual imagery was highly influential for the tarot tradition. And also the cards are spectacularly beautiful. They're hand-painted on gilt-ornamented grounds. And we know quite a bit about the circumstances of their commissioning.
One thing that really astonished me from the presentation that you gave during this exhibition preview is kind of the science that you mentioned that you and Frank and the other colleagues at the Morgan did, and sort of helping us understand like the layers in which these cards were assembled, some of the pigment that has faded over time. What do you think people are not really imagining when they just look at the cards, which are beautifully scanned and preserved on the website? How did they differ in their original forms?
The biggest thing for me, and this is one of the findings of the research team that really surprised me the most, is there was a presence of glazes on the cards originally. These are, for the most part, gone. They exist only in small little fragmentary remnants on the cards, but using high-end imaging techniques that I cannot tell you about, this would be Frank's material, they were able to reconstruct how the glazes may have originally shaped the appearance of the cards, and this particularly affects the ornament of the metallic surfaces, and it just gives an extra level of lux to the cards. They're already spectacular objects, but when you realize the presence of the glazes on top of the gold, on top of the paint, these were really, really delicately worked, fabulous objects.
Now, we're talking about these absolutely beautiful works of art as these cards, but I am going to ask the gamer inside of me needs to know. There was a game being played. What was the game itself?
It's a trick-taking game akin to bridge. Now, I'm not a card player, so I can't tell you exactly which game it's most like, although I will say that tarot is still played as a card game in parts of Europe, particularly in France.
Cool.
So, and you can look up on YouTube the rules of the modern tarot card game, which are very complicated. And in terms of the historical game, no rule books survive from the Renaissance. We have to extrapolate back from 17th century sources to reconstruct how the original game may have been played.
Okay, amazing. Now I'm going to have to go down a YouTube rabbit hole to learn how to play the tarot.
Oh, there are many that yes.
There were some people on our Instagram, the Morgan's Instagram, who said, I used to play tarot as a child growing up. I noticed that.
Amanda, I think our new goal for ourselves when we're in like the same retirement community together is instead of bridge, we're going to have to get all of the old ladies to start playing tarot.
That is absolutely correct, Julia. And it's going to really reveal us as like the low-class broads that we are, because something that I learned also in visiting the Morgan for this is that tarot differed from quote unquote chance games like dice. I wasn't aware of this whole kind of like moral hierarchy of games of skill versus games of chance. Josh, can you take us through it?
Yeah, so there was a very pervasive discourse in the 15th century about the appropriateness of playing games, particularly for nobility and especially for women. This was something that was frowned upon if you were playing games of chance like dice or even regular playing cards. This was considered something that could lead you into sin and temptation or open you up to vices. And there were a lot of negative depictions and comments about game playing. Tarot emerged within this discourse as a game of skill, like chess, which was considered to be the perfect game, the game that was most appropriate for the nobility, because it was a game that relied on your intellect. And there's no real chance involved, it's all skill. And so tarot, even though tarot is a game of chance in the sense that you're drawing cards from a deck, it positioned itself as something that required skill because you had to have an understanding of the hierarchical figural cards, the trump cards, the so-called major arcana, in order to play the game.
So fascinating.
Now I'm just thinking of all the deck builders that I play on my Switch, and I'm like, oh, okay, so that would be appropriate for a woman of nobility in Renaissance Italy.
Yes.
Cool. Good to know.
Yeah, the drinking games, we'll set those aside. That's for like the select group of biddies after dark.
Well, and some scholars, I think, have very persuasively suggested that it was considered an appropriate game because it helped young courtiers, particularly young women, learn what we would today call the soft skills, the social skills that you need to be part of the Renaissance court. So how to have a poker face, how to have a strategy, how to organize your thoughts and defeat your opponent in a really subtle way. So all of these soft skills were cultivated through this type of game.
So fascinating, particularly because, Claire, a lot of kind of your portion of the modern tarot focuses on counterculture, on psychedelics, right? On like occultists, what I would just call fellow weirdos, people who I would not think of in any way as the kind of like buttoned up, courtiers and people who are some kind of like expression of virtue. Was any of this context, I don't know, like it must have been on your mind as you were curating the modern half of this exhibit?
Yeah, I mean, that's very interesting. I actually didn't think about that too much just because there really is this pretty stark divide between tarot in the 15th century and the transition to tarot as a kind of divinatory tool, which really happens in 18th century France. So, naturally, when we enter the realm of divination and fortune telling and all of that, we are entering a very different terrain. Although I think Josh had mentioned that there was an element of a kind of fandom or sort of like a faddish nature to the original interest in tarot in the Renaissance. And so even though there wasn't a fortune-telling aspect to them, they would use them as sort of fun party games. I mean,
yes.
Is that correct, Josh? It kind of moved outside of the strict rules of tarot playing, and they would sort of use the cards to sort of create situations where they would perhaps be choosing which person at the party represented which card. And so they had to kind of create these scenarios for why this card was appropriate for this person. So I think there was something in the cards, I guess you could say, that stirred people's imagination. So that even though perhaps the official use of the cards was that it was sort of a morally appropriate activity, there was a kind of the way in which the cards elicited people's imaginations and people's interest, I guess, does feed into the modern and contemporary moment and explains perhaps why the cards have had such staying power, like why it was these particular cards that then transitioned into being these divinatory tools. Because in a way, almost anything could have done that. So why the card specifically? And I think it is something about the power of the visual imagery in those cards and just the way in the nature of the specific arcana that they just in a way spoke so universally to people.
I'm going to start assigning people tarot cards every time I throw a party now, where just like they walk in like, and here's your card for the evening, and here's your card for the evening.
I mean, it's pretty great. I think people may want specific cards. You may find that everyone is constellating around a few core cards but you might have those outliers who really want the devil card or the tower card.
Listen, as a Queen of Cups girly, I know that that's what I would want assigned to me. So I feel you.
Let's get into some of that imagery. Josh, a lot of what you did in kind of the origins and helping to facilitate as someone like me who's never really thought particularly hard about the imagery of the original cards, certainly, Like what else was going on? What else are artists creating at the time? What imagery would strike viewers as familiar to them? What would have struck them as unfamiliar? So can you tell us a little bit about like the imagery you notice in the cards of the 15th century and how that compares to like art and artisans, what people were viewing and making at the same time?
Well, the first thing to bear in mind around when tarot cards were invented around 1440, maybe a few decades earlier, this is the same exact moment where artists are starting to illustrate Petrarch's poem, the Triumphi, the Triumphs. This is a 14th century poem that was famous for decades after Petrarch died. And it was around this time that artists started to really illustrate the poem in many, many different ways, in tapestries, paintings, manuscripts, prints. That poem, the Triumphi, provides the conceptual framework for what we now know as tarot. It has the concept of one allegorical figure triumphing over another one. So chastity defeats love, time defeats chastity, fame defeats time, so on and so on. The iconography of the imagery in those illustrated texts relates to the imagery we see in the major arcana cards, right? And in fact, tarot's first name in the 15th century was Triumphi, the triumphs. And that's the origin of the word trump for the trump cards. They're triumph cards. So that's the biggest touchstone for what's going on with the development of this imagery. But in a broader sense, they're also drawing on a really pervasive aspect of Renaissance visual culture, which is to present abstract concepts through personifications. So especially personifications of women. The figure of justice, for example, is a woman holding a scale and a sword. Temperance is a woman pouring water from one jug to another. These are very common visual symbols that would have been understood by anybody in Renaissance society.
And part of that probably was the sort of imagery that you were getting of not like the rediscovery of the classics like Greek and Roman mythology, but at least those sort of archetypes, right?
Those are archetypes that they're rooted in antiquity, but they persisted throughout the Middle Ages and were common in the Renaissance as well.
I'm just thinking how, in a lot of Greek mythology, you have these gods and goddesses that are acting as personifications of things like victory and strength and temperance and stuff.
Of course. And this is also a moment where you have a real interest in understanding the chain of being. So the cosmic hierarchy that goes from the lowest to the highest. And that's really what the structure of the trump cards is. It's going from the lowest figure all the way up through the ranks up to the highest cosmic figures, which are the world and God, ultimately.
Can I ask a really silly question?
Of course.
Why is the sun a baby?
Why is the sun a baby? Oh, you're talking in the Visconti Sforza deck.
Yes.
Yes. So that is that's one of the replacement cards. I can go on and on about the replacement cards. There are 6 replacement cards in the Visconti Sforza deck, which we know is something that happened. There are other mentions of it in documentary sources. Patrons would request or commission artists to make replacement cards for their deck, which is a really important indication that they were in fact used. These were not just display objects. They were used in gameplay. They were damaged and they got lost. And the 6 replacement cards in the Visconti Sforza deck they were made to fit exactly in the deck. So the same dimensions and the backs are painted the same way, but the style is very different. It's a much more classicizing style. So you see in the strength card, for example, instead of a personification of the woman holding the lion, which would be the normal tarot symbol, you see Hercules battling a lion, so it's a classical take on the subject. And the sun image is the same. It's a classical illusion rather than the more traditional tarot image of the sun.
Thank you so much. I'm glad I wasn't just like, why is there a baby with abs? And what am I not understanding about this Renaissance imagery?
But I think that's the really important thing, a message, is that even in the Renaissance, artists were taking really creative liberties with tarot imagery, right? So you have the standard sequence, you have the standard iconographies, but from the very beginning, artists are approaching it in creative ways and doing their own things with it, and they're not at all afraid to innovate and deviate from the norm.
So good. What a segue. I am going to refill my cup because I don't know about you, Julia, my ace of cups, it's overflowing, and I think I have to dip my glass back under the fountain. So folks, let's grab a quick refill and we'll be right back.
Let's go.
Hey everybody, this is Amanda and welcome to our refill where I would love to implore you. Folks, listen to me really carefully. I'm going to say something I haven't said in I think 6 years on Spirits, which is, if you could please rate and review this show on your podcast app, that would be super helpful. Listen, this doesn't help the show like climb the charts or anything, but when people come to the show and they look at the rating and they think, is this a thing that people enjoy? Your star ratings and nice reviews really help us. So whether you are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pocket Casts, Overcast, or on YouTube, we would appreciate if you would take a moment to rate and review the show. Can't do that on YouTube, but you can subscribe and leave us a nice comment. So that would be super helpful. Thank you very much. Would love to get 50 new ratings and reviews over this next week. So do your part. Thanks, y'all. Thank you as well to our newest patrons, Jill, Lainey, Katrina, and Emily. You are smart and beautiful, and you have decided to help support spirits with your hard-earned money. We so appreciate you. You are going to be getting a postcard in the mail, a special promotion that we did for our patrons around episode 500, so I hope you love it. And thank you as well to our supporting producer-level patrons, Alicia, Hannah, Scott, and Matthew, Lily, and Will, as well as our legend-level patrons, Captain Jonathan, Malachi, Cosmos, Audra, Sarah, Bia Miep, Scotty, Morgan, Rico-like, Chibi Yokai, and Smoliv. You listening right now can sign up for free for our Patreon just to follow what we're doing, get the first announcement about stuff that's coming up for the show. We have some plans coming up for October. I will let you know. All of that is at patreon.com/spiritspodcast. Lots going on over at Multitude, which you'll love to see, including fabulous new episodes from one of our hosts who I got to hug recently, IRL, Deboki Chakravarti, co-host of Tiny Matters, which is also hosted by Sam Jones. This is a show about how science shapes every facet of our lives, but a lot of its influence is either overlooked or buried in the past. Tiny Matters is a multiple award-winning science podcast about the small science of big things. That means microbes behind deadly diseases to molecules informing our search for extraterrestrial life. Sam and Deboki, both of whom are former scientists and current podcast hosts, embrace the awe and messiness of science, as well as its significance, both today and in the past. If you've ever wondered something like, can we resurrect extinct species? How do viruses change our brains? Will humans ever live on Mars, or is that just a fantasy? I need you to go listen to Tiny Matters. New episodes come out every Wednesday, so go on over and subscribe now.
We are back, and one of the things that we love to ask our guests is, what have you been drinking lately? Whether that is cocktails, mocktails, coffee creations, what has been your drink of choice?
Ooh. My go-to is a margarita. I could make a margarita in blindfolded in 2 minutes flat, and I think it fits any occasion. And I'm never sad to have a margarita. Let's just put it that way.
Incredible.
Are we talking on the rocks, frozen, flavor? What's your poison?
Of course, on the rocks. Of course. Tequila, triple sec, 4 limes, a little bit of lemon, no syrup.
Citrusy. I love that.
Do you salt rim?
Not at home, but I mean, if there's a special occasion, then yeah, of course.
You'll bust it out.
If you're going out for it and they offer it, why not?
Well, of course, yes. I'm not going to do it myself in the kitchen, but yes.
I did just have an education this weekend. I mean, I can't say that I'm a whiskey drinker. I really think this question is more appropriate for my husband than it is for me. But I did have an education from him this weekend about different types of whiskey. So I did experience a whiskey flight. Not that I can recall any of the information about these different whiskeys, but I did experience 4 different whiskeys, and I am proud of the fact that I was able to tell the difference between them. So I think that, and I did kind of have a favorite among them. And I did learn the difference between rye and bourbon and all these things. So, I feel pretty proud of that. But as my friends will know, I'm not really much of a drinker. So, so I feel proud that I now at least understand kind of what whiskey is, and the great many varieties that they are. So I have a new appreciation for whiskey, I guess you could say.
I love that. My husband's always saying that it's impressive when you start developing a whiskey palate, as he calls it. So being able to tell the difference between a bourbon and a rye, just by taste. So you're on your way.
Yes, I'm on my way. I think I can get there. I think I can get rye and bourbon at least.
I believe in you both as scholars and your ability to put your mind to it.
Exactly.
Okay, there you go. We're always continuing our education one day at a time. You know what I mean?
So true. You know who was drinking a lot, I got to imagine, is Aleister Crowley and that bunch of misfits.
Right.
I feel like I have a personal drinking game with myself, Claire, where when Aleister Crowley appears in a place I didn't expect him, it feels like something is haunting me. Like that man is involved somehow in the Wikipedia articles of so many things in my life. What generally do you kind of explain his role in the popularization of tarot as a divinatory practice to be?
Right. I mean, the origination of tarot as a divinatory practice happened well before Aleister Crowley. So that really happened in 18th century France. That was when we essentially saw this transition. I think there's a number of factors that produce that, but essentially there was just, this tarot for whatever reason. And I think, again, it goes back to the imagery and sort of the universal nature of that imagery, but grabbed the attention of occultists. There was also a sort of massive rise in Egyptomania. So people were sort of obsessed with ancient Egypt at the time and were sort of looking into different kinds of ideas about magical practices in ancient Egypt, which they then in turn associated with tarot, which was, of course, a sort of fictitious association. And then there were a number of scholars, among them Court de Gébelin, who penned an analysis of the way in which tarot was a divinatory tool. So that really happened in 18th century France. And then that kind of scholarship moved over into the UK. So it was pretty well established by the time Crowley came on the scene. People were using tarot in a divinatory way. That transition had happened. But among other figures, he was one of the key figures to produce a tarot deck, in a sense, that he then kind of created a whole association around. And that was the Thoth Tarot deck. So it was really through, I think, the imagery as much as his own scholarship that, that sort of accounts for the influence that Aleister Crowley had.
Anytime we can mention the fact that rich people were eating mummies during the Egyptology craze, I'm always excited to talk about that.
Josh, I'm curious, as you look at modern tarot decks, as you walk the other kind of half of the exhibition, are there images that jump out to you as particularly like Renaissance in origin or like Renaissance Italy coded in that particular moment? Like what has sort of survived that surprises you, if anything?
Absolutely. And I think one of the most fascinating things for me coming to this topic, as I was not a tarot person before this exhibition, but I am now, it's just how vital the pictorial tradition is. So you see in not in a stale way, but in a really fascinating way, how certain key images, and I'm not just talking about concepts like the Fool, but actual compositional choices persist over centuries and are picked up by artists in really interesting ways. I mean, we were just talking, Claire and I were just talking with Chris O'Feely by chance the other day, who commissioned pieces for the exhibition. These are brand new pieces, and there were some incredible correspondences between his brand new 2026 compositions and the Renaissance choices going back to Bosch and earlier artists. And you see that as well. Pamela Coleman Smith was looking directly at the Solabusca cards when she was designing her images. You could see the Hanged Man popped up in contemporary artists. Like it's a tradition that is alive, and it's really fascinating to watch.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it goes back to, in a way, you don't really know whether modern contemporary artists are looking, it's in a way you're seeing the Renaissance filtered through certain key practitioners. So a lot of it does go back to key individuals. And I think even more than the Thoth deck, the Thoth deck, I think is probably still the second most used deck today, but is the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. And so, And it was because, as Josh said, Pamela Coleman Smith was looking at the Solabusca deck. I mean, she was looking directly at that deck, and she incorporated that imagery into her work. And then subsequent artists have, seen that deck and picked up on the imagery in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. And so that tradition has continued. But I do think it comes down to those key individuals. Like if you had not had Arthur Waite and you had not had Pamela Coleman Smith specifically her choice to, incorporate that imagery into her deck, there could have been a break in the tarot tradition. So it's not too much to say that, it is this very long and extensive history that shows no signs of abating. But if it hadn't been for key individuals, maybe that would have changed. Maybe that would be different. Maybe tarot would not have continued in the same way at all. So you really can boil it down to certain specific individuals.
To Amanda's question, I'm going to ask almost the opposite question, which is, what do you attribute the cards that didn't make it to the modern day? Why were they left out by a lot of these artists? So I'm looking at the deck now, the Juggler is the first card instead of the Fool. There's a Popess and a Pope. Obviously, in translation, I can see maybe why those didn't make that into there, but there are differences, there's time, which we don't necessarily have in the modern cards and stuff. So what do you attribute those not translating into modern tarot?
Well, they're sort of there. I mean, they just changed. They transformed, right? So the Juggler is what we call the Juggler is really an English translation of Bagato, which is a street performer. It's, someone who's it's like a busker, someone who's on the street doing magic tricks. He became the magician.
Ah, see.
And the Popess became the high priestess. Time, even in the Renaissance, was sometimes depicted as a hermit. It was it's the idea of an old man who's sort of by himself in a cane, and he's either, in some cases, he's time, very clearly time, in other cases, he becomes a hermit. So there's a variability already in the Renaissance with certain figures, like the Tower, for example, was never called the Tower in the Renaissance. It was called Lightning, Arrow, the House of God, or the House of the Devil, all circling around this idea of divine catastrophe. A lightning strike that destroys a building, which was a very, obviously big fear then as now. And that association carries on. It's the same, even though it wasn't called the Tower, it is the Tower card that we know today. It's a process of transformation more than things being left out, I would say.
Yeah, and the Fool card is still the first card. It's just 0. So that's where you're saying. So the Fool is number 0, and then the Magician is number 1. So that has continued to this day as well. I think probably along the way, again, in certain key decks, specific changes were made for whatever reason. Sometimes that just comes down to chance, or it comes down to a decision that was made by that individual making that deck, and for whatever reason that has carried over. So now we do refer to the Juggler more often as the Magician, but still you see, some artists referring to it as the Juggler. There is this kind of inherent openness built into tarot. So it is a tradition with a very stable set of images, but within those images, there is this sort of inherent openness built into them. So I think people feel a certain flexibility and a certain permission to change things while retaining the sort of core figures and characters.
That gives me a kind of Ship of Theseus paradox feeling, which is how much can the imagery of a tarot deck change? How much can the form of a tarot deck, the number of cards, right? How we depict those suits change before it's no longer tarot. I don't know. Is there an instinctual answer that either of you have?
I mean, I don't have the answer to that because I am not a tarot reader. You know what I mean? So I don't think about tarot so religiously. I think that probably tarot readers would have a specific answer for you, that maybe they need to have, I think probably the 78 cards is important. They would probably accept just a tarot of the major arcana, because there are those decks too, which are the 22 cards. I think if they vary too much from tarot, they become maybe what's known as oracle cards, right? It's sort of like that they allow them to be a kind of divinatory tool set, but it's not the same thing. But in the show, we do incorporate work that is a very fun take on tarot. So, for instance, there's a work by an American artist named Dorothy Yanone, which is a suite of cards that she made for her partner, Dieter Roth. It's called Tarot, in parentheses, pack. And it has nothing to do with traditional tarot, right? Each card is her own made up thing. Sort of, she says this card generates grief, this card generates hope. It's like every card is different. So we're allowing that because we are really focusing on the spirit of tarot and the inventiveness that tarot has fostered. But certainly that would not be considered a traditional tarot deck by tarot readers or tarot scholars.
I think we haven't asked you about in the process of like understanding tarot and becoming, to your point, Josh, maybe a tarot person now. Perhaps, Claire, you're not a reader, but I would argue you are quite well versed in the world of tarot. I'll say for my part, this show really exists at the intersection of understanding practices that we might not believe to be literally true, but we do believe are important because of just their persistence throughout time or just the meaning that we assign them. For me, I love tarot as a tool of understanding myself and to understand, wow, why did I have a reaction to that? What is this telling me? If this, traditional wisdom is saying something good is coming, does that excite me or does that make me nervous? And it's almost like that prompt for self-reflection. I don't know, have either of you evolved your relationship with tarot? Does tarot have a ongoing place in your life now?
Well, I just had my first tarot reading a week before the show opened.
Oh my gosh.
How'd it go?
My first official tarot reading. I mean, I had friends kind of do readings, but I thought, I really want to have an official, long time tarot reader. It was fantastic. It was great. But it was really interesting because she said at the outset, and again, since I haven't had that many tarot readings, I don't know if this is very common or unusual, but she said at the outset, I'm not a psychic. She made it very clear to say, I'm not about sort of telling you what is going to happen or, telling you the future in any way. I am a guide of sorts. And so it really was very much about, in a way, I guess there was an element of telling the future, but it was more like, okay, I see that, you could do this, or you could sort of decide, there's a energy here that suggests that it might be time for this. So it's more about reading energy and I guess capabilities, I guess you could say, or sort of states of mind and possibilities rather than telling facts or events. It's not really about telling sort of what will happen, but more about helping you understand what you are capable of. I guess that would be how I would describe it.
Paths and possibilities is how I've heard it described to me by people who read often. So I love that as a description.
And I've had a similar experience as well. I think in the lead up to the show, I told myself that I would not turn down a tarot reading if the chance presented itself to me. So I wouldn't go out of the way. But there were several moments, actually. I remember coming out of a loan negotiation meeting at a museum, and there was a tarot reader right on the street. And I was like, well, I have to do this. I can't pass this up.
Well, since she's here.
She's right there, right in my path. And so I did that, several times during the preparation of the show. And for me, what I found so interesting about the practice is that it is a tool for self-reflection. It can be, or at least that's the way I found it to be very helpful. And I think we all need different ways of getting beneath the surface of things, whether it's meditation or therapy or any other sort of practice that helps you dig beneath. And I think the tarot, a good tarot reader can help you do that. You focus on a topic and the cards, thinking about the cards, thinking through the cards can help you get behind some of the ideas that are swimming around in your head.
In preparing for this exhibition, do you have a favorite tarot deck now?
I think my favorite tarot deck was the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, and it remains the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. There's just something so, I guess, legible about that deck, which I like. It's hard for me to imagine doing a tarot reading with, say, the Thoth Tarot, or with a deck that is more about kind of energies and colors and sort of dynamic lines. An abstract deck, I think, would be difficult for me too. But there's something, I feel like when I'm doing a tarot reading, for myself, it really is about literally reading into something. So I'm drawn to a narrative deck and a deck that is clear. And there's something about that deck, and I haven't been quite able to put my finger on it, but she began her career doing designs for theater sets and posters. And I think you get that sense of theatricality in the work. There's this very consistent sort of platform on which these scenes take place, this kind of, sandy ground. And there's most of them, and this ocean in the background. And so you almost feel like you can literally read yourself into those images. So yeah, that's the deck that I think of when I think of any particular card.
For me, I was surprised to feel a connection to the photographic decks in the modern gallery. I love B. Nettles' deck. I think it's so amazing, the first photographic deck. And there's also another deck in Claire's gallery that I think is called the Insomnia Tarot. And I forget the artist's name, but I just love the imagery. I just think it's so evocative and full of narrative potential. And for the Renaissance portion, my favorite is by far the Visconti di Madrone cards. I just think they're the most spectacular objects. They're just so beautiful.
Yeah, it's interesting. Sorry, you mentioned the Somnia Tarot, which is it's absolutely amazing. It is also set kind of on an ocean or with an ocean backdrop. Same as the Rider-Waite-Smith. I feel like there's this sort of ocean in a lot of them. And also the drawings made by Adam Putnam, who's a contemporary artist. And he decided he was going to set his deck on an island in the ocean with a tower. And I don't know, that idea of maybe it's being sort of outside of the world, right? That we're in this other place. And I feel that way in the Rider-Waite-Smith. I feel that way in the Somni. I feel that way in Adam Putnam's. But yet it's another place that is clear and legible and grounded in a certain sense. So it's interesting thing that I think a lot of people do sort of pick up on that those sort of elements, ocean, ground, other, elsewhere, that sense of an elsewhere.
I'm just looking at the Somnia deck photos now, and they're, oh my God, so beautiful.
It's an incredible deck, yeah.
I think it's amazing to see how an artist creates a consistent mood or feeling across 78 different cards. And I think I respond when it's a real challenge, I think, to do that. And I respond to moments when artists are able to pull that off, really to keep a mood, an aesthetic consistent throughout distinct cards. It's yes. Amazing to me.
And still make them interesting.
Right. Yeah.
All 78 of them compelling.
That's something that stuck out to me too, Josh, in the Renaissance portion, where, like, to me, someone who doesn't study this all day long, I look at a Renaissance painting, I'm like, it's a Renaissance painting. Like, I can, if someone draws my attention, like Claire's Whiskey Flight, if someone draws my attention to, the patterns, the motifs, the shapes, I can follow along, which is why I love reading all of the, the annotations in the exhibition and going along with you. But something I was starting to notice is how much, like, texture, for example, is a big part of the cards that I don't think I would have realized without seeing them in person. Like, I can only imagine the feeling of them and seeing, like, the little, like, embossed lines, whether it was done by a machine or like a pinprick. I was just, like, fascinated by, as you put it, like, the luxury objects of these. When you think about, like, the visual language of the Renaissance versions of tarot, is there kind of like a shared universe that it's pulling from? And rather, what contextualizes or what defines that shared universe?
Absolutely. The first section in the gallery is devoted to that question and showing how the tarot cards are, as art objects, part and parcel of the visual culture in which they came, right? So they are reflecting the aesthetic of the Renaissance courts. And you see this in the interest in fashion, in the interest in ornament, the use of metallics like gold and silver. This is something that you see in all aspects of their art. So that absolutely is a very strong connection.
I was speaking with Chris O'Feely in the gallery yesterday. This is the project that we commissioned, and he made 5 Arcana figures, which he was actually connecting to Trinidadian Carnival. He's Trinidadian, so which is very cool, but they're all done with collage. And we didn't realize until we saw them in person how much texture there was in them. So they're elements that actually fully project out from the paper and go back to the paper. And he was explaining that he was very specifically working in that medium to make them feel card-like, because he had actually come and looked at our cards prior when he was sort of doing research for this commission and had observed their emphasis on texture. And so in a way, he was sort of transplanting that sort of gold plating texture, from the Renaissance to the collage aesthetic of the modern contemporary period. And a lot of artists working in tarot today are using collage.
I'm just looking at the card right now on the website, and particularly the Diablo one stands out to me. That is stunning. Wow.
Yes, it's incredible. They're really amazing. And seeing them in images just doesn't do it justice. We had seen them in images and had no idea until we opened the box crates and took the objects out how much dimensionality there was.
What an amazing experience just to be able to do that.
I visited the exhibition with my sibling, who is a filmmaker, and they were describing to me kind of the process of the photographic deck, Josh, that you pointed out of, layering in those practical effects, right? Like you are making collage with photograph, like you are adding on to the same plate, you are adding on, the superimpositions that make a sort of like visual, illusion. You are doing that work by layering things in photograph, which we don't necessarily think of in pre-digital context. So I love this unplanned continuity. The thing that has stuck with me perhaps the most since visiting this beautiful exhibition that you have both put several years of your professional lives into is the Egyptomania of it all. Now, I do have to ask, Josh and Claire, I think you were probably like getting a PhD while I was fucking around with Yu-Gi-Oh cards, but is Yu-Gi-Oh a cultural phenomenon that either of you is familiar with?
I'm sorry, not.
What is Yu-Gi-Oh?
It is a Japanese card game.
Not unlike a Pokemon card, but it kind of like trades in the imagery of ancient Egypt and has a interior logic that there is like ancient Egyptian gods that make their way through this like young man in this Japanese cartoon. So I'm just curious. I pasted into our chat here just a Google image search of Yu-Gi-Oh itself and various imagery that you can see in the cards. I don't know if this is anything, but in my brain, I was like, oh, in 17th century France, they're doing Yu-Gi-Oh! Like Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a modern sort of Egyptomania trying to project these kind of ideas and find an intellectual, thread in the past. Just a quick glance from two experts. Any images in these Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards strike you as particularly tarot coded?
Oh, to me, it's looking a lot like the Thoth cards. I'm not sure there's any direct links.
I absolutely agree with you that this is in the spirit of the Thoth cards. It's sort of these figures that are caught up in a swirl of kind of diagonal lines and swirling lines and colors, right? So it does have that kind of psychedelic feel with which the Thoth tarot has as well. And I don't know, maybe it is the influence of the Thoth tarot. I feel like the Thoth tarot had an influence on Star Wars, because there are literally figures in the Thoth tarot that are, I think one would say, okay, this figure looks like it has come out of Star Wars. I mean, in terms of like even this sort of horned figures. So, I mean, who knows? I think the influence of I don't know how, is it that they're just sort of engaging in the same font of imagery, or is there maybe a direct influence? It's hard to know exactly.
Thank you for indulging me. That was very kind of you. Josh, Claire, any final thoughts or things we didn't ask you about that you think our audience of queer, witchy, modern tarot practitioners and readers might want to know?
I mean, I think that, one thing, I think that tarot has been very important to the queer community. And, we have, I guess one thing I will say that I'm proud about, that we were able to include the original drawings by the tarot scholar Rachel Pollack. That was really important to me. So for the most part, my portion of the show is showing artists who have engaged with tarot imagery. And these artists are not necessarily people who engage exclusively with tarot. And they're not tarot scholars necessarily. But I did think it was important to include some work by tarot, principally tarot scholars in the show. So I included, I think, 6 or I can't remember, 9 original drawings from Rachel Pollack's deck. And those are the first time that those original drawings have ever been shown.
Wow.
So, I think it's important to acknowledge that, Rachel Block was not herself a visual artist. She was a writer and a scholar of tarot. But at one point, I think it is important in the world of tarot, if I'm not mistaken, to be a true tarot practitioner, you have to make your own deck, or that's sort of part of the mandate. At least that was the mandate in sort of the Golden Dawn and some of these occult circles from the first part of the 20th century. And so Rachel Pollack wanted to make her own deck, and she couldn't find an artist that sort of that she liked, essentially. So she created her own drawings. And they're absolutely exceptional drawings. So I just love the fact that we were able to also to sort of include, people who maybe don't consider themselves to be fine artists or visual artists in the show alongside people who are principally visual artists. And yes, I'm just proud of that moment in the show.
Well, thank you so much again, Claire and Josh. If folks would like to follow your careers and the work that you do after this online, is there a good place that they can go to find you?
Sure. I mean, I am on Instagram, Claire S. Gilman. That's probably my main social media source.
I'm also on Instagram. It's Josh O'Driscoll.
Fabulous. Josh, next time I'm in need of a margarita, I am going to find you.
Yes, let's do it.
Amazing. Well, thank you both again. Definitely encourage anyone who can to get out to the Morgan Library Museum to see this fabulous show. And in the meantime, everybody, next time you find yourself walking into a party, someone hands you a tarot card and says, do with this what you will. Remember,
Stay creepy.
Stay cool.
Later, Saters.